The late afternoon sun dipped over the rooftops of Florence, painting the cobblestones in gold. The small Italian Trattoria di Roma, was bustling with tourists, the air rich with the aroma of baked bread and basil. Laughter floated through the air, glasses clinked, and an old man played the accordion by the fountain outside. Among the crowd sat Alexander Drake, a billionaire venture capitalist from New York, known for his arrogance as much as his fortune. He was in Italy on business, scouting new luxury properties, but as always, he preferred to flaunt his wealth rather than appreciate the culture. His tailored navy suit gleamed under the sun, a Rolex sparkled on his wrist, and his expression carried the smugness of someone who believed the world revolved around his name. He was not used to waiting. So when a waitress didn't arrive within 3 minutes of him sitting down, Alexander sighed loudly and tapped his expensive pen against the table. From the kitchen door, a young woman stepped out, her dark hair tied back neatly, wearing a white apron dusted with flour. She carried herself with quiet grace, the kind that didn't need attention to be noticed. Her name was Isabella Rossi. "Buongiorno, signore," she greeted with a polite smile. "Welcome to Trattoria di Roma. Would you like to see the menu?" Alexander barely looked at her. "English, please. I don't have time to play guessing games." Her smile faltered slightly but remained courteous. "Of course, sir. Here is the English menu." He snatched it from her hand, muttering under his breath. Typical. Even in Italy, service takes forever. Isabella ignored the rudeness. She had learned to deal with tourists who treated her like part of the furniture. But what Alexander said next made her stop cold. As Isabella turned to fetch his drink, Alexander leaned back and smirked at his business associate sitting across from him, a man named Richard Hale. "You know, Richard," he said in Italian, thinking she couldn't understand, "you can always tell who's poor by the way they stand. Look at her, she moves like she's still begging for tips." Richard chuckled awkwardly. "Alex, maybe keep it down." But Alexander waved him off. "Come on, it's true. You can't buy class. Just look at her hands. Those are the hands of someone who scrubs dishes, not someone who builds empires." Isabella stopped mid-step. Every word was clear. Perfect Italian rolled off his tongue, and though she had been polite, his tone was dripping with cruelty. She took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the tray. For years she had worked hard, juggling university, her mother's medical bills, and this small job. Her father had died when she was 16, leaving behind debts and dreams that never came true. But she had never allowed anyone to humiliate her for trying to survive. When she returned to the table, her eyes were calm, but her voice carried quiet fire. "Signore, posso consigliare qualcosa di più adatto al suo ego?" she said smoothly. Alexander blinked, confused. "What?" She smiled faintly and repeated, in perfect English, "Sir, may I suggest something better suited for your ego?" For a moment, silence fell over the table. Richard looked stunned. Alexander's confident smirk wavered. "You speak Italian?" he asked, clearly taken aback. "Fluently," Isabella replied, her tone still polite but sharp enough to cut through marble. "I studied linguistics at the University of Florence. Italian, English, French, and Latin. I also translate documents for foreign investors who come here to exploit the culture they don't bother to understand." Alexander's face flushed. "Listen, I didn't mean." "Oh, I think you did," Isabella interrupted softly. "You just assumed the waitress was beneath you. That's fine. People like you always assume." Around them, nearby tables had grown quiet. The accordion music outside had stopped. Even the old man by the fountain was watching. Isabella leaned slightly forward, her voice still calm but commanding now. "You said I looked like someone who scrubs dishes. You're right, I do. I also help my mother, pay my own tuition, and work 12-hour shifts to build a future I can be proud of. Can you say the same, Mr. Drake?" Alexander opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Money buys many things," she continued. "But dignity isn't one of them." The air was thick with tension. Richard shifted uncomfortably, murmuring, "Maybe we should go, Alex." But Alexander just stared at her, shocked, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, that someone dared to speak to him that way. "Who do you think you are?" he finally managed to say, his pride bleeding into anger. Isabella met his gaze. "Someone who knows who she is. Can you say the same?" That line hit him like a slap. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by a flicker of something deeper, humiliation, maybe. Or the uncomfortable sting of truth. He stood abruptly, leaving a €100 bill on the table. "Keep the change," he muttered. Isabella looked at it, then back at him. "You can keep your pity, sir. I don't serve that here." The crowd erupted into quiet applause as Alexander walked out, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the tiles. A week passed. Isabella had nearly forgotten the incident, at least she tried to. The story had spread around town. Some customers came just to meet the waitress who humbled the American billionaire. Then one morning, the trattoria owner came to her with a puzzled look. "Isabella, there's a man outside asking for you. He says it's important." She wiped her hands and walked out, and froze. It was Alexander Drake, standing in the sunlight, but this time there was no suit, no arrogance. He wore simple clothes, sunglasses tucked into his shirt pocket, and in his hands, he held a small bouquet of white lilies. "Miss Rossi," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She folded her arms. "Do you?" "Yes." He took a deep breath. "You were right about me. I've spent my whole life believing money made me better. But after that day, I kept thinking about what you said. It haunted me. You reminded me of something I lost a long time ago, respect." She studied him for a moment, uncertain whether to believe him. "I grew up poor too, you know," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, I started to think that meant I had to look down on others to prove I'd made it. You made me realize how wrong that was." Her expression softened slightly, though she said nothing. He held out an envelope. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's an offer. I have a cultural foundation that funds education abroad. I want to sponsor your final year at university, no conditions, no publicity. Just a chance to help someone who reminded me what real strength looks like." Isabella hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, her pride burned too brightly to accept help from the man who once insulted her. But another part, quieter and wiser, told her that accepting kindness, especially when born from humility, wasn't weakness. She took a breath. "If I accept, it's not because I forgive you," she said. "It's because I believe people can change." Alexander nodded. "That's all I can ask." She accepted the envelope. Inside was a formal letter from his foundation, offering full tuition coverage and a note in his handwriting. Greater than, "You taught me that intelligence isn't spoken in English or Italian, it's spoken in humanity. Thank you for reminding me." Winter came to Florence with crisp air and twinkling lights. Isabella had graduated at the top of her class. With her newfound confidence, she started working as a translator for international conferences, often helping bridge gaps between people who, like Alexander once did, saw only wealth and status. One evening, while attending a global entrepreneurship summit, she spotted Alexander again, standing by the stage, speaking about ethics in business. When his speech ended, their eyes met. He smiled faintly, and this time, it wasn't the smile of a billionaire, it was the smile of a man reborn. He approached her after the event. "I owe my best talk to you," he said. She chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." He looked around at the glittering crowd of investors and dignitaries. "You know, when I was your customer, I thought I was the one with power. But the truth is, you were teaching me a lesson I didn't know I needed." "And what lesson is that?" she asked. "That respect isn't earned by wealth, it's earned by how we treat people who can't give us anything in return." In time, Alexander and Isabella became unlikely friends. She consulted for his foundation, helping create scholarships for working-class students across Europe. He, in turn, learned humility from her, visiting schools, talking to children, listening instead of commanding. Whenever he was in Florence, he stopped by Trattoria di Roma. Not as a customer who demanded service, but as a man grateful for the woman who once stood up to him. "Do you ever regret calling me out that day?" he asked her once, half joking. "Not for a second," she replied, smiling. "If I hadn't, you might still think people like me were invisible." He nodded thoughtfully. "And if you hadn't, I might never have seen people like you at all." Years later, journalists would write articles about Alexander Drake's transformation, from ruthless investor to one of Europe's most socially responsible philanthropists. When asked what changed him, he always gave the same answer. "Greater than, a waitress in Florence who spoke to me in perfect Italian, and taught me what perfection really means." Isabella, meanwhile, continued her journey, traveling across countries as a cultural ambassador, speaking at universities about dignity, language, and self-worth. Her story became an inspiration to thousands of students who worked day and night to chase their dreams despite humble beginnings. Whenever someone asked how she found the courage to speak up that day, she smiled and said, "Greater than, because silence would have meant agreeing that I was less." And I knew I wasn't. On a warm spring evening years later, the trattoria was still standing. The same cobblestones, the same laughter, and the same smell of bread in the air. Inside, an old photo hung on the wall, a candid shot of Isabella and Alexander shaking hands outside the restaurant, taken the day he apologized. Below it was a small plaque that read, "Greater than, respect has no price. Speak your truth, even if they think you won't." And outside, by the fountain, the accordion player began again.